It's very interesting to have in mind the example of the UK because it's very atypical in a way. On the one hand, it reinforces your conclusion that there is not a negative impact of immigration in the labor market, because we have seen enormous influx of immigrants since 2011 into the country, and at the same time the labor market has improved. The unemployment is around 4%.
For the UK, right?
Yes,
the UK.
And the employment rate is like 78%, something like that. So of course we cannot use that as a natural experiment, because people have gone there because the country was thriving. But in any case, I think it's a good example to have in mind. But on the other hand, there is a survey made by I think it's an agency from the UK government. I can send you the reference later on if you want. And when studying this issue for the UK, they do point out to slight negative impact of wages of immigrants in wages for the case of low-skilled immigrants. So I think that's interesting to have in mind. By the way, I think, I'm going also back to your presentation, that the key issue here is, when speaking of the impact in the labor market, is flexibility. This has been possible in the UK. This positive correlation between labor market and immigrants, because the labor market is very flexible, and I think that's one of the keys to be able to absorb all the influx that's coming to our country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, is there any question or?
No, just
not this in the room, I would say. Yes, the room, of course. Thank you very much. Yes.
May I just ask a couple of questions, because I to the second one, the one that because the first, if you can be a bit more specific about that cultural distinction, which is going to matter a lot in terms of the result, because I don't know if we are trying to be polite here, because I did some study of my own in Italy. It turned out, for example, that what is matter is a religion, Muslim. So the kind of reaction to Muslim is one thing, and nobody cares about the Chinese, because Chinese, you don't see them around. So if you can be a bit more specific about this kind of the cultural effect. And the second question that I wanted to ask is, you see, looking at the voting outcome, voting behavior is fine, no? Because it's a one way which you have an objective measure. But you see, only looking to the vote of the center right is not, I think, I underestimate the effect, because what you should really look is how the agenda or the other party also move, because that's the one thing that you see. You know, since you have to even more moderate party or even leftist party, they have somehow to move to the right, particularly on this issue, just to cope with it. So, I mean, I'm curious if there is some study I try to make this point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think these are two excellent points. Maybe to the first one. So the last slide that I skipped. So this was another of these survey experiments, and what the authors there did is they described asylum seekers in terms of various characteristics, like the reason for the asylum claim, the level of the previous occupation, sex, origin, country, religion, and so on. And there it turned out that even if you keep kind of the reason for the asylum claim constant, first, people have much more support for giving asylum to higher qualified individuals. So if you ask them, this individual was unemployed before, this individual was a doctor or a teacher before, both have been tortured, they would still say we should give the teacher and the doctor have more rights to asylum. And they're also distinguished by religion, and there they also find what you also found in Italy, that there is more opposition to giving asylum rights to Muslims, holding everything else constant, which again points to a bias towards certain cultural, certain religious group. And the other aspect I think is extremely interesting, and not really aware of a lot of research on that, not only how the political demand on the side of the voter changes, but also how the supply of policies and political platforms shift. And I'm totally agree that there is a lot of work to be done exactly on that issue. Yeah.
So regarding your questions, actually, I know some studies on the UK, and indeed, some economists tended to find that on average immigration has actually increased the wages of native, especially because immigrants tend to downgrade their skills. They tend to work in work which require lower education, okay, than the natives. However, this study tend also to show that immigration tend to have in the UK some distributional consequences. It increases the wages of the top skilled natives, but tend to decrease the wages of the native who are at the bottom of the wage distribution. So I fully agree with you. And just to finish regarding labor market rigidity, this is of course a very interesting question, how rigidity and labor market rigidity can shape the impact of migration. So there is actually not so much research on this. This is on our research agenda. We are going to incorporate this kind of issue and concerns in the report, but we have to still more on this and to to make some studies to better understand how rigidity can affect the labor market impact of migration. So I think it's now the time to close this session. So I was very happy to share it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. I also thank the speakers, and have a nice coffee break. Thank you so much.